of the women add charm and zest to the affair.
Budget 2020, the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman presented the Union Budget of 2020 in Parliament today. She announced the launch of a new personal income tax regime which can help the middle class save taxes, and also scrapped dividend distribution tax. And we'll give you an in-depth analysis of the budget, and we'll give you different reactions as well. And let's now introduce, because during the next 1 hour we're going to be discussing largely what industry has got from the budget, and this is a dialogue with the CII Dialogue. And we have with us, let me introduce our guests in the studio. We have with us Mr. Shashi Shekhar Vempati, who is the CEO of Prasar Bharati and also an authority on digital technology and digital economy. We have Vikram Kirloskar, President CII. We have Chandrajit Banerjee, who is the Director General of CII, and Naushad Forbes is past President of CII. So let's begin the discussion, and we'll turn to the CEO of Prasar Bharati. The Finance Minister said, Mr. Vempati, that the digital revolution has placed India in a unique leadership position globally to see in the next wave what the government is going to do is a seamless delivery of digital governance, life through national infrastructure pipeline, risk mitigation through disaster resilience, and through pension and insurance penetration, all this through digital economy. What do you have to say about that focus?
Thank you, Mark. Very delighted to be here and host a very distinguished panel from CII, perhaps one of the first that we've done in this budget series on Doordarshan. Coming to your question about the digital economy, one of the things that struck me throughout the entire budget speech today was the number of times the finance minister referred to using technology, be it analytics, algorithms, artificial intelligence, to improve governance and delivery of governance. So on that front, what we are seeing is a massive infusion of technology at various levels of government in service delivery, finding efficiencies and plugging the holes, and making sure that the right benefits reach the right targeted beneficiaries. On the other side, which is developing the digital economy itself, India has had a challenge keeping pace with recent technologies like artificial intelligence. Hence it was interesting to me to see that we are already thinking ahead, that we should take a leadership position in emerging areas. So quantum computing, the budget that was committed to and the plan sends a clear signal that with emerging technologies, we will no longer be caught napping. We will, plan ahead. So clearly, it's a budget in the right direction as far as the digital economy is concerned.
Mr. Kirloskar, the finance minister looked at economic development from the point of view of industry, commerce, and investment, and infrastructure. Now, as far as industry, commerce, and investment is concerned, what do you think is there in the budget that will immediately spur entrepreneurship, in a sense?
It's difficult to say that you can switch on entrepreneurship. I think
she said entrepreneurship is the strength of India.
It's the strength of India, but you can't, and it has been always the strength of India. I think even at the peak of public sector dominance, I think Indian entrepreneurs and the Indian rural business and everything, private sector business was a larger part of the economy. There's no question of that. And we still have the largest amount of startups, new unicorns and all these things coming up. So we but to say that one economic statement will spur entrepreneurship in an extra way, I think it's a little difficult to say. I think you have to create an atmosphere for it. You have to create a market for it. It's we keep talking about investment. How do we increase investment without really looking at how to sell? I know in all my experience, it's very easy to set up a production site and very difficult to sell. So I think the key issue for us, and in this budget, the key issue for me was how will demand really be increased, and any increase in demand will push the entrepreneurial skill to the maximum. That's
right.
We'll get the best out of entrepreneurs.
Right. Mr. Banerjee, talking about increasing demand, the finance minister, through the tax cuts, has put about 60,000 crore rupees into the economy. That should spur demand to some extent, wouldn't you think? I mean, this is from personal income tax.
One of the biggest thing that was being talked about was whether the finance minister is going to give some money in the hands of the people to boost the consumption demand. And this entire restructuring that has been done on the income tax slabs, on the face of it, looks to be very interesting because it gives different types of leeway to different groups of individuals in different tax brackets. And I think the propensity at those levels where she has really made those changes would be much higher, and therefore one sees the type of consumption that would come from there, would the consumption demand spur that you talked about that would come from there would be quite substantial. And and I think that's a very given the other measures which has been taken by her, especially on the rural economy side.
Sure.
Coupled with this, makes the consumption demand looking to be pretty I would be pretty much optimistic about it.
But if we stick to industry for the moment, Mr. Forbes, there was the feeling that there were too many roadblocks for industry. She says that she's clearing all the roadblocks with this investment clearance cell, which will provide end-to-end facilitation. That should, in a way, answer some of the concerns that were raised by Mr. Kirloskar at the start, that what needs to be done to spur investment, to spur entrepreneurship, because if you have end-to-end support by the government with one investment clearance cell, shouldn't that clear the path to some extent?
Well, the investment cell will really address larger infrastructure projects. I think Vikram was talking about more widespread entrepreneurship covering the wider industrial sector. And I think investment will take place in the wider industrial sector when demand recovers. And for demand to recover, there are several things that do need to be done. I think, first of all, we should recognize that the finance minister was in a very difficult position. She's faced with a slowing economy, an economy that's growing using official government figures at its lowest rate in 11 years. If you take nominal GDP at its lowest rate in 40 years. So she's faced with revenue that is stressed, expenditure that has grown in this current year, and therefore she has to manage a deficit as well. So she had a really unenviable task. And I think really dealing with that was what she was trying to do today. Now you can either deal with it, in our companies when they say that if you're in trouble, do less is a good bit of advice. And I think maybe it applies at the country level as well. But I think what we heard today was not do less. We heard a much more business as usual budget, a budget that covered a whole range of different subjects, including many useful points on the tax system, particularly in Part B of the budget, useful things, but I think it was more a business as usual budget and not a budget that was designed to address the immediate stresses that the economy faces today. I think for that we'll have to look forward to actions that the government will need to take post the budget.
And Mr. Kirloskar, would you think that the fiscal responsibility is important as far as the budget is concerned? The fact that fiscal deficit has been maintained at 3.5%. How does industry look at that? Because that's how investors will be looking at the country, whether the government's management of the economy is as such that they can that even in difficult times they're able to maintain the fiscal deficit within a certain figure.
Before this, we've been always taking a stand that fiscal responsibility is important, and we must follow the glide path. But this year, with the kind of challenges that the economy faced, in CII and myself as well, we suggested that why don't you move the goalpost on the fiscal deficit and let the spending expand. This is a risk. At some point you have to take risks, and I think it's better to take the risk of spending a little more money and trying to spur increase the demand. And
she has done that. It's gone up to 3.8%.
Yeah, but I think perhaps even a little more. And what we were asking for is perhaps use that money not just to directly, but to leverage that money in a long-term financial institution like we used to have, like IDBI, so you can leverage that amount and go for even larger infrastructure projects. Two things. I think there's a lot of spending and ideas on agriculture and the rural sector, which is very, very important.
Okay.
For me, it's rural sector, agriculture sector should be doing well, leave industry alone.
Okay. Mr. Vempati, you know, one of the important aspects was about 5 new smart cities. And the idea is that the government is trying to maximize the benefits of 3 separately developing economic activities, which are the upcoming economic corridors, the revitalization of manufacturing activities, and technology and demands of aspirational classes. And this also needs to be put into a PPP mode. I mean, we can talk about PPP mode with our other guests, but how would you understand the point of view of trying to build these new smart cities, leveraging these 3 gains?
See, I think the smart city initiative is extremely important because we have to, scale up the capacity in our cities, improve, local urban governance. The first phase, you had certain cities that were, enabled with investments. Now the second phase is taking off.
Right.
One of the interesting things that we've seen in recent years is the Swachh Sarvekshan, which has, put the pressure on several cities across India to improve, urban civic management. You have new cities like Indore that have shaped up and have been consistently doing well in these ratings. So you see another interesting thing which in the budget which was mentioned today was the internship program where fresh engineers could take up internship with local urban bodies, and that is another interesting way of building capacity and so on. So that is on the urban front. What was striking to me is a long pending demand or need was building up data center capacity in India, because ultimately if we have to see AI take off in India, e-commerce take off in India, digital innovation to happen here, the data centers have to be located in India, the servers have to be located in India, the cloud computing capacity has to be built up in India. So finally you have a scheme here which will look at building data center capacity across every part of India. So ultimately all of this will come together in boosting the digital economy. Let me also add a point on the entrepreneurship topic that we just discussed. I think wealth creation has finally taken, people are not shy of talking about wealth creation. I think that's a new thing, that's a very appreciable thing. The Prime Minister spoke about it in the Independence Day speech. Today the Finance Minister repeatedly emphasized it. Ultimately, if we have to create an entrepreneurship society, a culture of entrepreneurship, I think we have to respect wealth creators and we have to celebrate wealth creation.
Right. Mr. Banerjee, how would you look at the point of view of the PPP model, which has referred to quite often in the budget? Even in the from the point of view of agriculture, there is viability gap funding for efficient warehouses in the PPP model. There is viability gap funding for hospitals under wellness, on the PPP model. And here again, all smart cities with the states on the PPP model. How much can this private sector invest?
It is for a country like India, it is extremely important that PPPs are successful. At this point, we have quite a variance, or rather quite a mixed sort of a result and perception as far as and the result as far as PPPs are concerned. But we'll need to create some models through which PPPs are successful and get more private sector involved in many of these projects that you alluded to.
Yes.
Agriculture, say for instance, for it to be productive, its productivity to go up, its mechanization to take place, it's important to see the type of private sector participation that has been envisaged in the budget. And similarly, so for other social projects like even the health care project, even the entire piece of Ayushman Bharat, say for instance. So we are the dependence on PPP would have to be very high, and rightly so. And I think what we should do is to see enabling mechanisms in which the PPPs are successful, and making them successful models of PPPs in all of these sectors are going to be very critical, and few success sort of stories are going to be very, very important as we go along.
Mr. Forbes, would you like to comment on this? Because there's another mention of PPP also under infrastructure, and that is in the railways, 150 passenger trains through the PPP mode. So a lot is expected from the PPP system. We know that some people thought that infrastructure could be built PPP, and there were some concerns about return on investment from the private sector. Is there enough return on investment on projects with the government?
I think the challenge has actually not been so much in the returns in PPP projects, but in the clearances that PPP projects require, especially for long gestation projects and projects where land acquisition is required, particularly. And delays in land acquisition then tend to lead to, you start borrowing for these large investment projects, you start servicing the debt, and if the project is delayed, the project then gets into trouble. So it's not that the return in the project itself was a challenge, but it's the way in which the whole project is parceled up and handed out that could be addressed in a more cohesive and fully cleared way up front. So I think there is potential in PPP in many different sectors. And I think if we can approach it in this way, in CII we've been talking for many years actually, that one of the key things, the key requirements for PPP is that a project should actually be awarded with the clearances in place. If it's awarded with the clearances in place, then actually the entire responsibility of successful execution and of earning the return that's supposed to be earned rests with the private party. But if the clearances aren't there in place, then you end up with this somewhat delayed execution. And the source actually of many of the NPAs in the wider infrastructure space is precisely these delays.
Okay, before we go ahead with the discussion, let's get a recap actually of what the budget has in store for everything, for all sectors. The Finance Minister, as we know, has presented this budget today, the Union Budget of 2020, and she announced the launch of a new personal income tax regime which can help the middle class save taxes. She also scrapped the dividend distribution tax, and let's take a look at this report. Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman presented the Union Budget 2020-21 in the Lok Sabha. A sum of 30,42,230 crore rupees will be spent on the country's development. Major relief for common man on tax front, tax slab slash to give respite to the individual taxpayers. New simplified tax regime with 7 slabs announced, tax rates of 10, 15 and 20% included. No tax on income up to 5 lakh rupees. Individuals with income between 5 and 7.5 lakh rupees to pay 10% income tax in place of earlier 20%. Income between 7.5 to 10 lakh rupees to now attract 15% tax in place of 20%. Tax rate on income between 10 and 12.5 lakh rupees reduced to 20% from 30%. 25% tax on income between 12.5 to 15 lakh rupees from earlier rate of 30%. Special focus on financial discipline in the budget. Fiscal deficit for the year 2019-20 is estimated to be 3.8% of GDP. 3.5% is estimated for the year 2020-21. Budget emphasizes on mantra of ease of living, financial growth, aspirations of India, and a resolve to create a caring society form the core of this budget. Agriculture, rural development and infrastructure, along with growth of new economy, are key focal points of the budget. New companies in manufacturing and power sector get a gift of a rate cut in corporate tax, domestic companies to pay only 15% corporate tax. Sovereign wealth funds and other foreign investments to also attract tax reduction. Big announcement by the Finance Minister to encourage foreign investment into the country. Dividend distribution tax abolished in order to make India an investment hub. Domestic companies get special reduction in DDT. 25,000 crore rupees gift from the government to the companies. Investment made in infrastructure sector till March 2024 to get a big tax relief. Interest, dividend and capital gains to remain tax-free. Foreign portfolio investors and qualified foreign investors to get tax concession in Indian bond market. Big step announced for the agriculture sector. Agriculture and irrigation schemes to get 1,60,000 crore rupees. Agriculture sector to undergo massive change through 16-point action plan. States adopting APMC Act, Contract Farming Act and Agriculture Land Leasing Act to get priority. Total farm credit target increased to 15 lakh crore rupees in 2020-21. Capacity of milk processing to be doubled by the year 2025 Fisheries exports to be increased to 1 lakh crore rupees. Budget envisages spend worth 1,23,000 crore rupees on rural economy and Panchayati Raj schemes. Special Kisan Rail to give impetus to food processing in rural areas. Dhan Lakshmi Yojana for proper crop management in rural areas. Organic farming and one product, one district gets special focus. PM's Jal Jeevan mission gets a big boost in the budget. 3,60,000 crore rupees allocated for this mission, out of which 11,500 crore rupees to be spent in 2020-21. Swachh Bharat mission gets 12,300 crore rupees in 2020-21. Health sector gets an allocation of 69,000 crore rupees in the budget. PMJAY to support setting up of hospitals in small and medium cities. Jan Aushadhi Kendras to be set up in all districts of the country by 2024. Education and skill development to get a boost with an allocation of over 1 lakh crore rupees. New education policy to be unveiled soon. Steps to be taken to attract foreign direct investment in higher education sector. First, National Police University and National Forensic Science University to be set up. Every district hospital to be connected with a medical college. Make in India to be promoted as per economic survey. Electronic manufacturing, technical textile and medical devices to be produced under Make in India. 5 new smart cities to be set up in coordination with private sector and states. Investment clearance cell to be set up to encourage entrepreneurship. One single portal to deal with all permission-related issues at central and state level. Limit of turnover for startups availing tax concession increased from 25 crore rupees to 100 crore rupees. Period to claim tax rebate increased from 7 to 10 years. Commitment towards overall development of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, a total of 30,700 crore rupees allocated for Jammu and Kashmir and 5,958 crore rupees for Ladakh. Transport infrastructure gets a booster dose with an allocation of 1,70,000 crore rupees. Account of development of waterways in the form of Arth Ganga, highways and rail network presented before the country. Electricity to every house with an allocation of 22,000 crore rupees in budget. National gas grid with 27,000 kilometers to be built. Tax rebate on home loan to encourage affordable housing extended by 1 year to give a boost to real estate sector. No capital gain tax on 10% profit over circle rate as against 5% earlier. Focus laid on new economy and budget. New policy soon to set up data center parks across the country. 8,000 crore rupees allocated in the budget for new mission on quantum technology. Knowledge translation clusters to be set up for biodiversity and developing new technology. Big announcement towards women and child development is 28,600 crore rupees allocated in the budget. Task force to be set up to take care of women availing maternity benefits. Task force to submit report within 6 months. 35,600 crore rupees allocated in the budget on account of portion-related schemes. Insurance cover to be given in bank deposits of 5 lakh rupees instead of 1 lakh rupees. In a bid to ensure safety of people's money in banks, the government to keep a close watch on banks, non-banking institutions and cooperative banks. To settle pending matters pertaining to tax disputes, Finance Minister announces Vivad Se Vishwas scheme. Currently, 4,83,000 direct tax cases are pending in various appellate forums. Customs duty on electric appliances, footwear, furniture, stationery, toys, compressors of fridge and air conditioners increased between 5 and 40% in a bid to promote Make in India. Customs duty also hiked on electric vehicles, parts of mobile phones and electronic sector. Cigarette and tobacco products to become costlier as custom duty on cigarettes increased. Except BDs, every other tobacco product to become dearer. So we can see the wide canvas that the budget has covered. Let's turn to our guests once again in the studio. Mr. Vempati, electronics manufacturing is very competitive and India has shown cost advantages, has to take advantage of this, and the government is going to announce a new scheme as far as this is concerned. How important is, India needs to manufacture network products to be part of the global value chain, and what is the scope?
see, there's a lot of hype around 5G right now across the world. China has taken a leadership position in the 5G ecosystem on the telecom side. It's very important for India to not just catch up in these emerging markets, I mean emerging opportunities, but also to take a leadership position. And so electronics manufacturing becomes extremely important. Mobile, we are one of the largest markets for mobile phones. The smartphone economy is growing. So all of these efforts in terms of bringing manufacturing, electronics manufacturing to India, making in India or assembling in India, and designing for the rest of the world in India becomes extremely important. So I see that
assembling in India also for the world,
Yeah,
which is what the economic survey did mention. And perhaps we can discuss a little bit about that with industry experts. How important is that? How quickly can it be done to create jobs in our country, assembled in India for the world?
I think we must do it. Sometimes people are critical, why this isn't really made in India, you must make parts and all. But things start with assembly. And let me assure you, you start assembling in India, and if you can, like you've started with phones and other things, and hopefully networks and computers and things. Computer imports may be more than oil in the future. So we can't afford it. We have to figure out how to make it. But once you start assembly in India, you're going to find suppliers who will come to your factory and say, I'll make this for you cheaper than wherever you're importing it from. And that will spur the industry on. I don't think this should be taken lightly or criticized. I think we should put our full might behind it. If you look at what happened in China along the coast and other countries in Penang in Malaysia, in parts of even Vietnam right now, certain districts of Ho Chi Minh and where they've created these cities, they start with assembly and you learn the manufacturing.
Okay.
The demand for manufacturing immediately starts coming up. You want to localize it, you find cheaper alternatives, how to get the parts, and it will happen. But I think the rest of the infrastructure also is equally important.
Fair enough.
What China did, what Penang has done, I think that kind of, certainly we must look at those kind of coastal, I think earlier someone had come up with idea of coastal economic zones, to spur this. I think we should pursue it.
Right. Also, Mr. Banerjee, there is, a provision that at least one port will be corporatized in the country.
Yeah.
Now, if we really want to export, we've had some problems with regard to too much paperwork and issues regarding ports. How important is this? A reform in a sense.
So creating a
ports
smart infrastructure for our entire for our exports is extremely critical. And this also has, of course, a good effect on the disinvestment side too. I mean, when you are really looking at from the point of view of port of what you said, but exports today is going to be a very critical factor for us in not only in terms of the economy, because that's one thing that because of lots happening in India and a lot of demand in India, we have tended to at times at points in time ignore sort of the but one of the things, examples which are said, that Indian companies are very competitive and Indian products are competitive, but once it leaves the shores of the factory to where it reaches the customer or the port or that's where inefficiencies sort of creep in. So to create a smart infrastructure right up to the end, especially for exports, is going to be important. And exports, mind you, is one of the biggest job generators and potential in the country. And therefore, creating and assembling in India itself gives another huge sort of impetus to exports. So all of this combined together makes it a very lucrative sort of proposition in the budget one sees as we go along.
Mr. Kirloskar, services are about 60% of our economy, GDP. I'm sorry, Mr. Forbes, I beg your pardon, Mr. Forbes. Services are about 60%. And really, as an economy gets to be, the 5 trillion type of economy, services are going to play a much bigger role, isn't it, over time? And it's going to be largely linked with the digital economy. To what extent do you think are we, prepared? Are there sort of gaps that need to be? There's a digital gap in a sense. Would you think rural, urban issues that there are 2 Indias, 3 Indias. Yeah.
So there's tremendous growth potential in services without question. But just one comment too on manufacturing, which is
Sure.
that, you know, this government and the previous government, the UPA government, had the explicit target of raising the share of manufacturing in GDP to 25%. And we shouldn't let go of that objective. It's a very worthy objective. Even if we struggle to deliver it, even if we've struggled where, you know, manufacturing was 15% of GDP in 1991, it's 15% of GDP in 2019. So it hasn't changed in spite of this being the objective over the last 12 years of across governments. We should hang on to that objective and really figure out how we deliver on it, because the potential is really great and the multiplier effect on services growth from really getting manufacturing moving is great. So services will be drawn into manufacturing. Manufacturing tends not to be drawn in if you get services growth. So the direction tends to run from manufacturing, driving services growth, and that's what we should really keep pushing. Where there is great potential in services itself is in areas like tourism. You know, I think too often we focus on things that are high technology. And I have no objection to high technology. But I don't think we should. I think as a country, we're big enough and complex enough to need all technology. And tourism is an area where it's not tech-based.
It is app-based nowadays.
Well, apps can facilitate tourism in a very wonderful way, right? And I think, you know, we should look at something like tourism as a huge potential growth driver, employment creator, value adder over the next 30 years. It has that kind of scope for us. You know, as a country, we're well down the tourism rankings relative to where we should be. We have everything that we need to be one of the world's great tourist destinations, except the right infrastructure and ambition to get there.
Right, and there's a lot of investment that's going to go into infrastructure. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue this discussion. Do stay with us.
संभाल के रखना, कोई ले न जाए।
हम जानते हैं कि बैंक में सिर्फ पैसे जमा नहीं होते। बैंक ऑफ इंडिया, रिश्तों की जमा पूंजी।
पहला अक्षर अ रट लो तो व से एक विद्वान होगा। पक्की होगी बुनियादें तो ह से हिंदुस्तान होगा। पहले करो शुरुआत करो तो पक्की बात करो।
वंडर सीमेंट, एक परफेक्ट शुरुआत।
बाकी सब बाद में, पहले सुन मेरी बात रे।
लाइफ के टेढ़े मेढ़े रोड पे होंगी चुनौतियां हर एक मोड़ पे।
बट हमने कभी ना फिक्र की, पर हमने कभी ना फिक्र की, क्योंकि हमने पहले ले ली LIC।
स्मार्ट लोगों की क्लियर है प्रायोरिटी, बाकी सब बाद में, पहले LIC।
ये लो। गुड न्यूज सर, आज से आपको पेट्रोल पे 20% का डिस्काउंट मिलेगा। 20%? लॉटरी लग गई। तो मेरे बाकी के पैसे क्यों डाले? वो तो आपके हाथ में ना। 45 की स्पीड पे गाड़ी चलाइए, रेड लाइट पे इंजन ऑफ कर दीजिए, 20% पेट्रोल तो जरूर बचेगा। बात तो वही है ना।
PCRA का एंड्रॉइड ऐप डाउनलोड करें और ईंधन बचाने के उपाय जानें। पेट्रोलियम संरक्षण अनुसंधान संघ, पेट्रोलियम एवं प्राकृतिक गैस मंत्रालय, भारत सरकार द्वारा जनहित में जारी।
संभाल के रखना, कोई ले न जाए।
हम जानते हैं कि बैंक में सिर्फ पैसे जमा नहीं होते, बैंक ऑफ इंडिया रिश्तों की जमा पूंजी।
Welcome back. And Mr. Forbes, before the break, we were talking about travel and tourism, and you were saying that it has a huge potential. You would be happy to know that 100 more airports have come in under UDAN scheme.
I think the UDAN scheme is an excellent scheme.
Yes.
And very good to hear it being expanded.
And also, there are 150 passenger trains through the PPP mode. Do you think that that's going to be successful, Mr. Banerjee, with the private sector invest in the railways?
Absolutely, and I think that is that's going to be a very, very critical component of also Make in India. And I think railways could really lead to a huge impetus both for manufacturing in India, and private sector itself getting involved would be extremely important. It cannot be done without the private sector. And secondly, of course, again, that it brings in the all-important factor of creation of jobs. And I think that itself triggers off a huge potential there.
Mr. Vempati, data is the new oil is a cliche, as the finance minister says, but she says that analytics, fintech and Internet of Things are changing the way we live, and hence she proposes to build data center parks throughout the country, which will enable our firms to skillfully incorporate data in every step of the value chain.
In fact, this is what I was referring to earlier.
Yes.
I think one of the interesting things that has happened in the last 5 years is this intersection of Aadhaar, direct benefits transfer, UPI,
yes,
right? All of these coming together to create a whole new class of services. And in that sense, India is perhaps, is probably ahead of some of the other economies. In fact, I was recently reading that the UPI model is being, studied by some of the Western economies as well. So now to take it to the next level, for innovation to happen in India, for a Google or a Microsoft to emerge out of India, for our digital brands to go global, we need to have cloud computing data center infrastructure in India, and that will only happen when we have a solid push, a very focused push for building up this capacity, so that it becomes the barrier is very low for an Indian startup or an Indian innovator to build a digital brand, to experiment with latest cloud technologies, be it AI and so on. And I think that is where this push for data center capacity will be very critical. In fact, this is one of our visions as well at Prasar Bharati. We are actively looking at how do we build up massively our own cloud computing data center capacity.
And this also, yes,
one more thing on data, I think, which is very important. I think it's the issue of security. We have to have data centers in India. We have to have our data in India. That's going to be the new security tool, or the vulnerability of a country. If our data is available to everyone in the world. I think we have to keep our data with us and keep it secure. And this is a very important announcement what she's made. Whether it's whether it was targeted towards security or business, I don't know. But definitely for security, both. But security is just as important, or to my mind, sometimes even more important.
She did mention that it would facilitate seamless application and capture of IPRs.
It's not that. It's just that data is
data has
gold.
to be okay.
But on the IPR point, I think a very interesting announcement was that they would, at one of the centers of excellence, they would build up a whole institution around IPR, and I think that's very important if we have to build intellectual property in India, right? And if you just look at the sheer volume of patents that China generates, recently I was reading that the IITs have ramped up substantially in the number of patent filings. There are a few of our startups as well which are creating technology in India which will have a global impact. So it becomes very important that we have a culture of IPR and we build up maturity and capacity around how do we protect our intellectual property. So this initiative towards building an institution around IPR is, I think, very important.
And what is really the meaning of knowledge translation clusters that would be set up across different technology sectors, including new and emerging areas? Is this translation of language, or
both? Both? At least to me, the way it reads is that today I think the biggest challenge for us is that there is knowledge of different kinds in different pockets of India, best practices, traditional methods of let's say agriculture, for example, rural innovation. How do you get knowledge across the country, right? And one of the things that we have been doing, for example, in Prasar Bharati has been that the language amplification, building that capacity so that information and knowledge is available to every corner of India. So that is how I see it. I don't know if they have a,
Yes.
the panel has a
No,
different
I
take on
totally
this.
agree on, best practices is the best and the cheapest way to take your country up.
Right.
There's no reason to import anything if you just copy best practices of your friends around you.
Right. And Mr. Kirloskar, since you're interested largely in agriculture, I can understand from the way you're talking.
I'm not interested in agriculture. I'm interested in agriculture in the sense,
Yeah.
I want the government
Right.
and the state to make the farmers rich, which is what she's saying.
That's
Leave
right.
industry alone.
Okay.
I don't know enough about agriculture, but I know if the farmer is rich,
Right.
rural India is doing well and agriculture is doing well, industry.
But in the
Will- will-
digital
will do
domain,
well.
she has spoken about
Yeah.
India's genetic landscape needs to be mapped. Mapping of it, medicine, agriculture, biodiversity management. For agriculture, this would be extremely important, having this kind of a database.
You have to use technology in agriculture. If you look at Israel, and actually if you look at what Sharad Pawar, forget Israel, what Mr. Pawar has done in his hometown of Baramati, that whole district of Baramati, which was completely devoid of water, only rocks.
Okay.
He's made it a phenomenal agricultural district by using just technology. He's used, whether it's in water, whether it's in agriculture, correct seeds. He's made it one of the largest cheese producers in the country. From where? Baramati, cheese producer. So it can be done with it's not a result you'll get in one day or 1 year or 2 years. I think he's done sustained work over the last 30, 40 years, and you see the results there now of solid application of technology and innovation in agriculture in a very parched district.
Right. Mr. Forbes, the 100 lakh crores that's being invested in infrastructure is a large number there, but the financing of it has people are wondering,
100 trillion rupees.
Yes.
It's a huge number, yeah.
It's a huge sum. So, and the private sector has to put in 20%, I think, is the belief. 40%.
40%.
40% is
The
quite.
government share is 40%. The rest
Yes.
is between the private sector
and the states.
and foreign investment.
And foreign investors, yes.
Yeah.
So, private sector is geared up for that, would you think? And look at the number of projects that's going across: housing, safe drinking water, affordable energy, healthcare, world-class infrastructure is required.
So if you go back in time, there was a 5-year period where we actually delivered on our infrastructure building plans. There was a 5-year period in the early 2000s, I think, maybe running between about 2002 and 2007, say, where we actually delivered on our infrastructure building plans, which actually involved investing around 10% of GDP each year in infrastructure. And it actually happened in that period of time. It happened in, again, many different fields. It happened through investments in airports, it happened through investments in power plants, it happened through investment in roads. There were a whole series of different areas where it took place. It also involved a lot of private sector investment. For example, in power plants, there was a lot of private sector investment that actually came in. In airports, through the PPP model, where airports were offered out for tender, the new Bombay and Delhi airports, Bangalore and Hyderabad airports, all of these were offered out and were actually successfully built out through private investment. So I think it's quite feasible if we come up with the right projects to attract very substantial private investment both within the country and private investment from overseas.
Mr. Banerjee, if you look at the tax structures and the concessions that have been announced, the dividend distribution tax didn't seem to, enthuse the markets very much. What was that all about?
The LTCG not happening took it away, but then, dividend and distribution tax is something which is extremely important. This has been done as it is being done in the international levels, and this is one thing which was a long-standing sort of ask from the corporate India, and which makes a lot of sense to actually tax it in the hands of the receiver.
Right.
And I think this is a big thing to not only towards what it does, if you really look at the effective rate of taxation in India, we had one huge cut of taxes just a couple of months back. But dividend distribution tax was making our effective rates of tax much higher.
Okay.
But today we have become truly competitive internationally, especially if you look at all the other Southeast Asian economies or globally. We are today, we could be amongst one of the most competitive in terms of the actual tax level, given now that the dividend distribution tax is withdrawn. So there is, it brings a lot of cheer actually to each and every company.
Fair enough. Mr. Kirloskar, about the concessional corporate tax rate for 15% for domestic power generating companies, from companies that want to enter into power manufacturing. How would you look at that? I mean, is that a big enough incentive for, to help the power sector become more competitive in a sense?
I'm for a flat rate of tax. If you're doing it for new industry, do it for power as well. Yeah, do it for the cooperatives. Do it for anything. If you're going to encourage new, and eventually, at some point, the total rate should come down to 15 with no exemptions and no something. That's what we have been asking for. See, one important thing I think you asked on this dividend distribution tax and some of the other things in the budget, and if you see what Mr. Modi has been doing over the last few years, I think he's trying to get the country to work on global standards. Okay, like the dividend distribution tax takes us to a more global standard. The corporate tax is just one idea, but I think whether it's the banks, the way the banks have been approached, whether bankruptcy law, whether GST, all this is, we have to get to a global transparency level. We have to get to global, if you want serious investment and you want to be part of the world economy in a serious way, we have to be like them at the same governance level as well. And I think what he's doing is helping us to do that. We are going in that direction.
And Mr. Vempati, about startups, there used to be a scheme of up to 25 crore rupees turnover would get 100% deduction, and you could take it for 3 years out of a period of 7. Now that has been raised to 100, startup with 100 crore turnover, 100% deduction, and you can take this for 3 years up to 10 years. So this is a good incentive for startups. And talk a little bit about the environment for startups in the budget.
Absolutely. I think first let me just react to your earlier point about biodiversity, bioinformatics.
Yes.
I think what we are seeing right now happening in China, for example, with the new novel coronavirus, it is spreading fast, but also you see a number of because of the large amount of genetic data information that is available, we are also able to respond fast, right? And India perhaps not only has a large biodiversity, we also have a large bioinformatics diversity. So what the finance minister was talking about, right, with genome mapping, and so that will help in faster drug discovery. The future of innovation, be it in nutrition, food, it's all going to be bioinformatics, right? And this is where this whole creating the right environment for startups becomes very important. Okay. Be it early life funding or the tax holiday that you were referring to, or even ESOPs, right? Because ESOPs, that is the incentive for someone to take the risk, innovate, do something creative, do something disruptive, right? So we have to create an enabling environment for startups. That is the only way we will hit this goal of a $5 trillion economy.
Right, we've run short of time. I'll give you the last word, Mr. Forbes. We have a $5 trillion target for the economy. The building blocks are being laid as we, through each budget. What do you think? This budget has done enough in that direction?
So, I think the budget has actually done many useful things for the medium term. What's missing in the budget are things for the immediate recovery of the economy. And if we actually come back to where we are now with very low growth and fairly low growth also projected in the budget numbers for 2021.
10% nominal GDP was projected in the budget.
10% against the 13%, 13.5% that we need each year till 2024 to get to 5 trillion by 2024-25, which is our goal. So it's a significant shortfall on our 5 trillion aspiration.
Right.
I think it's a realistic number to actually go after next year.
Okay.
And if we do all those right things and we see a recovery in the economy, then we could perhaps get to 5 trillion by 2024. But we will need to do some things to ensure an immediate recovery of the economy, and those will have to now happen post the budget.
Right.
So things around the government paying its bills as a liquidity infusion into the economy, things to address the real estate and non-banking financial company issues.
There was some financial
That's
sector
what we
reforms,
need
but
to do.
yes, but I think we've run short of time. Thank you very much, Mr. Naushad Forbes, Mr. Charanjit Banerjee, Mr. Vikram Kirloskar, and Mr. Shashi Shekhar Vempati for joining us on this hour of discussion on the budget, and our coverage on the union budget will continue soon after this break. Thank you very much for watching. Namaskar.